From Halo to GoldenEye to Mario Kart, it's generally frowned upon to look at your opponent's screen when playing head-to-head, split-screen co-op games. However, Nintendo has always had the opposite opinion, going as far as to encourage screen peeking, and for good reason. While it might be an effective strategy, hiding, camping, and timing out your opponents are inherently unenjoyable strategies and reduce the fun of all participants. Since Nintendo is known for valuing fun above all else when it comes to game design, it's natural that they would implement countermeasures towards players attempting to time out their opponents. A very poignant, if inelegant, example of this stance is Mario Kart 64's battle level, Block Fort, which uses visual contrast to ensure players are constantly engaged. The Mario Kart 64 instruction booklet states that Block Fort consists of a series of floors, each 3 levels high. The 4 blocks are colored red, yellow, green, and blue, so you can quickly check your opponent's screens to find their locations, with the webpage having a similar description which also mentions using the distinct color coding of each tower to quickly tell where your opponent is at. While inelegant, color coding is perhaps the most effective way to ensure visual contrast in level design. Visual contrast is important because it allows for users to instantly process information, allowing them to put that information to use immediately. In a game as simple as Mario Kart, this just means that it's very easy to know where you are, where your opponents are, and therefore where you are in relation to each other. But what if we got more intricate with the information that needed to be processed? Let's take Kirby Air Ride's City Trial mode for an example. City Trial is considerably more complex than Mario Kart's battle mode, and therefore it's more important than ever that players are able to quickly process information. This is when visual contrast is essential, as the use of visual contrast essentially codes information to be more palatable to the player's memory. Memorizing an entire map with all its functions and properties can be daunting, making it really difficult for players to remember specific facts about each area, such as which area has which spawn rates, which events happen where, and where legendary parts are most likely to spawn. But when a map is broken up into pieces where every piece contrasts and has its own unique style and aesthetic, it can become a lot easier to process and remember essential information. It's the difference between putting together a puzzle by finding pieces that go together, making bigger fragments of recognizable information until it all comes together, and putting together a puzzle by memorizing each individual piece and knowing where every piece goes before you even begin constructing the puzzle. Both methods are perfectly viable, but the former is far more palatable. This patchwork style map is what City Trial is based on, and in my opinion is why this mode is so enjoyable and successful. It's easy to recognize patterns because each area is so distinct. As a child, I was able to internalize almost all of the properties of City Trial simply by playing it, and this contrast-focused design is the reason I can return to the game 13 years later while playing with my husband and still remember that the bunker field only spawns red boxes containing legendary parts, or that the city center is the best place to find blue boxes containing power-ups but has a near 0% spawn rate for legendary pieces. Every area is memorable, and by extension, the information and properties of each area are memorable. City Trial might be far more complex than Block Fort, but it still pales in complexity compared to most modern competitive games, where screen peeking is non-existent and decisions made in a quarter of a second can be the difference between a win and a loss. In these situations, where information has to be processed instantly, visual contrast is more important than ever. Let's use League of Legends Summoner's Rift as an example. Summoner's Rift prior to PTR patch 4.19 was very bland. Aesthetically, the map was very simple and extremely homogeneous, with almost everything being a shade of brown or green, with the most unique colors being the vibrant and colorful stone gray found in each base. However, during 4.19, the map received a total visual overhaul, and in my opinion, this is how games should do visual contrast. The lanes are appropriately unchanged color-wise. The individual mechanics of each lane are all extremely similar, so it's unnecessary to retain or recall specific info about each individual lane, and therefore unnecessary to visually differentiate between each lane. However, the jungle was completely overhauled, both visually and aesthetically. Since the jungles originally all looked very similar, despite each quadrant having different mechanics, layout, properties, and functions, it was very difficult to immediately recall the properties of each quadrant because they had no visual distinctiveness. When it comes to a competitive MOBA like League, where every piece of info is vital and can be the difference between a win and a loss, it's important to be able to recall information without even thinking about it, and this isn't easy when every part of the map looks alike. However, after the overhaul, each quadrant was given its own aesthetic and theme, creating a significant amount of contrast between each quadrant. The North Quadrant is covered in dead trees and barren dirt paths. This gives the entire quadrant a distinct brownish hue and creates an environment reminiscent of a dying forest. The East Quadrant is covered in glowing blue runes which reflect off of the gray stones and wilted pine trees surrounding the area to create a muted blue hue, making the entire area feel mystic and mysterious. The South Quadrant mirrors the North Quadrant, and as such shares a similar style. However, while the North Quadrant was largely barren, the South Quadrant is in bloom. The dead trees which remain are overgrown with moss, and new live trees are sprouting up in almost every corner of the area. The lush green color that is overwhelmingly present makes this area feel wild, full of life, and decidedly distinct. Finally, the West Quadrant, which closely mirrors the Eastern Quadrant. This area still has the runes embedded on various rock faces, however the runes are much more subdued, leaving the rock faces themselves as its most prominent feature. This leads to the area feeling very craggy and decidedly grey. While all of the areas are largely arboreal, each has their own unique aesthetics and are instantly recognizable, all while remaining in the general aesthetic for the game. Rather than completely color coding every aspect of each quadrant, there is a subtle color theme, with all assets used in each quadrant adhering to its leading theme. This subtlety allows players to very quickly remember the functions and facets of the quadrant they are in, while maintaining the game's natural aesthetic, all without feeling forced. While visual contrast is not essential for every game, it is an extremely versatile way to encode information in a way which is easy for a player to parse. While any information can eventually be memorized over many hundreds of hours of play, using visual contrast, developers can ensure players memorize the same information in a fraction of the time, and are able to recall that information in a fraction of a second. This contrast can be as simple as color coding and as complex as building entire aesthetic themes which fit into the game's overall aesthetic. Visual contrast also ensures that each area of the game feels unique and distinct, and helps prevent a cobblestone gray path from being the most visually unique aspect of your game. Hey everyone, thanks again for watching. I don't have much in the way of an outro this time, but in light of my recent hiatus, I wanted to just go ahead and plug my Twitter. Twitter is by far the best way to reach me and stay up to date with the channel, and it's also the best way to get notified of videos because YouTube has been kind of inconsistent as of late when it comes to notifying subscribers. Other than that, if you haven't subscribed and liked the channel, I really suggest you do so, and check out some of my other content. Be safe everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.